A pride of lions had cornered a lone baby elephant, but just wait until you see who stepped in to save him. That morning, the Tava grasslands were quieter than usual. Overhead, grey clouds loomed undecided, wavering between staying dry or releasing their burden, while the wind crept carefully through the golden stalks as though it feared what it might stir. Near the eastern edge, beyond a riverbed turned to dust, a baby elephant wandered without direction. Small, unsteady, and painfully out of place. 2 nights before, he had been separated from his mother. Rangers believed poachers had slipped through in darkness, though no direct evidence was left behind. The calf had been left adrift, dazed and dangerously alone. No herd, no leader, no rhythm of movement. Just a 6-month-old trying to follow fading scent trails and sending soft, desperate trumpets into the empty air, pleading for a response. What came wasn't what he needed. First 1 lion appeared, then 3, and soon a full pride, 12 in total, emerged like spirits from the tall grass. Their approach was silent and exact. They split like a net around the calf, who backed up to a mound of earth, waving his trunk and stumbling with fear. He was too young to run, too small to stand his ground. The lions didn't rush in. Not yet. They were hunters who knew the value of patience. They circled, watched. The lead lioness crouched, golden eyes locked on her target, waiting for the signal to strike. From afar, a giraffe lifted its head. A warthog froze, mid-stride. The savanna itself paused, breath held. And then the earth began to shift. Not with thunder or chaos, but with weight. From the south came a tremor, deep and deliberate. At first it was subtle, then unmistakable. Dust lifted, trees stirred. And then, like a great secret being revealed, a colossal figure stepped into the clearing. A bull elephant, towering, weathered, scarred, alone. No one had seen him in over a year. The locals called him Muntu, the ghost of the plateau. He'd been cast out from his herd long ago, pushed aside by the fierce rules that governed bulls. Exiled and wandering, Muntu had become a story. But that morning, something called to him. He entered the space like a mountain born from the earth. The lions froze. The calf, trunk lifted, didn't move, his eyes wide with something like belief. Muntu didn't rush. Not yet. He walked slowly, steadily. Each step sounded like judgment. Ears spread wide, head raised. He released a roar, not loud in volume, but deep in weight. It was a sound you felt before you heard. The lead lioness took a step back. Muntu moved again. That was all it took. The pride began to break. Not in panic, but in understanding. They retreated, slowly, deliberately, as if something ancient had returned to claim its place. It wasn't just might they saw, it was memory. They knew not to challenge what they couldn't defeat. One by one, they vanished into the tall grass. The baby remained frozen. Muntu approached, then gently touched his trunk to the calf's back. The little one leaned in as though gravity itself pulled him to safety. And Muntu stood guard, immense, unmoving. As the clouds finally gave in and rain spilled across the plains. It was no accident. It wasn't just instinct, it was something else. Because that day, an outcast responded when no one else could. And in that moment, the world shifted. The rain thickened, steady now, washing over the land as if to cleanse what nearly became a tragedy. Muntu didn't move. His body formed a living wall between the baby and the wild. The calf huddled underneath him, tucking his trunk close, peering upward in awe. What passed between them was more than protection. It was recognition. Somewhere inside, the calf seemed to understand. He had been chosen. Not by blood, but by something deeper, stronger. Something earned. From a ridge above, a ranger named Elijah lowered his binoculars, his hands still. He had tracked the lions earlier, noting their odd pattern. When they moved toward the east, he followed, fearing the worst. When he saw the pride surround the calf, he'd reached for his rifle, too far to intervene in time. But then the old bull had stepped in. Elijah watched, heart thudding. He remembered the name. Everyone did. Muntu, the ghost, the loner, the protector from the old stories. To those who once claimed they'd seen him, Muntu was a ghost. Elijah had doubted he was even still alive. Yet here he stood, solid, immense, guarding a calf not his own as if it were. Elijah breathed barely a whisper. "I don't believe it." But he did. Some moments don't ask for belief. They simply demand to be witnessed. Muntu moved at last, slow and steady, nudging the calf forward. The little one hesitated, uncertain, legs slipping on the damp ground. But Muntu waited, with the quiet patience only an elephant possesses. And soon, the baby followed, step by clumsy step, beneath the towering shadow of his guardian. They didn't head for cover. They walked openly into the wide plain, where danger still lingered. Muntu didn't lead the calf into hiding. He led him into the open, teaching without words, teaching strength. By the time they vanished beyond the horizon, Elijah had already sent word to headquarters. The response was disbelief, until the drone footage came through. No narration, no urgency, just the image of one elephant protecting another and walking side by side into the unknown. By sunrise the next day, the story had begun to ripple outward. Wildlife forums lit up. Conservation sites shared stills from the video. Photos showed the calf tucked close to Muntu's side, and captions called the moment sacred. But what no one else had seen, what only Elijah could say, was what happened just before Muntu disappeared from the clearing. The bull had paused, turned, lifted his head toward the ridge, and in that moment, he looked directly at Elijah. Not as prey, not with threat, but with a gaze that felt like a command. Don't act. Just watch. Just remember. In the following days, trackers tried to pick up their trail, but Muntu left no clear path. He was a shadow moving through memory. Yet the calf left softer signs, gentler prints near shaded trees, shallow waterholes, always next to larger, deeper tracks, always in pairs. Some called it adoption. Others said luck. But Elijah knew the truth. What he had seen wasn't survival alone. It wasn't instinct. It was something much older. A bull long cast out had returned to protect the one thing he believed he no longer deserved: connection. And for the calf, left with nothing, that bond became the start of everything. The two elephants wandered out of range, out of reach. Muntu avoided the usual trails, guiding the calf through thorny thickets, over hidden salt licks, down forgotten dry beads passed down through generations of bulls. This was no longer about safety. This was about learning. Day by day, the calf walked more steadily. His legs found their rhythm. His confidence grew. But he never strayed far from the old bull. Muntu was no longer just a shield. He had become a place, a presence, a home. The baby mimicked him, dusting himself in red clay after Muntu rolled in the dirt, fumbling to raise his trunk when the bull sniffed the wind. At night, under stars sharp and clear above the acacia, the calf curled beside Muntu's side, breathing deep, sleeping soundly for the first time since the night he was orphaned. Yet, the winds began to shift. Muntu, long forgotten by his own kind, was no longer invisible. Not to predators, but to his peers. Word of what had happened spread like scent on the breeze. Other elephants, herds crossing the edges of Tsavo, began to slow when they caught his trail. Matriarchs paused longer at water, Lone bulls, exiled like Muntu, followed his massive tracks from a distance. They had heard, and in elephant memory, stories are not lost. One morning it happened. They were seen again, this time near the southern watering basin. A scout radioed it in. A calf and a giant with half a tusk. Elijah drove nearly 70 miles, barely blinking, until he reached the ridge just as dawn broke. What he saw made him stop breathing. Below, in the soft mud, stood Muntu. Ankles deep, trunk lifted, he sprayed arcs of water into the rising light. The calf trumpeted, joyful, bounding through puddles, splashing and nudging Muntu's leg with clumsy affection. And the bull, once a silent spectre, responded with something new. Deep rumbles, slow breaths, the gentle knock of trunk to flank. This was no longer silence. This was language, emotion, connection. But they were not alone. Across the basin, another herd had gathered. Not Muntu's former family. They had long migrated elsewhere, but a new group, cautious and attentive. Elijah could see it from his vantage point, their formation, their stillness. They weren't hostile, but they weren't open either. The matriarch stood still, eyes locked on the bull and the calf at his side. Her stare was long, measured, not hostile, but unyielding. Muntu didn't back down. He didn't posture or threaten. He simply held his ground. The calf stopped mid-play, ears twitching, gaze shifting toward the distant herd. Something deep within stirred, an ancient awareness. Elephants remember what it means to belong, even the smallest ones. Tentatively, the baby took a few hesitant steps forward. That's when Muntu moved, not to stop him, but to wait. Quiet, present. Slowly, the herd advanced. Elijah's breath caught. He could hardly believe what he was seeing. The matriarch stepped forward first, each movement deliberate, calm but guarded. She paused just a few feet away from the calf and extended her trunk. The baby stood frozen, unsure, then let out a high, trembling trumpet. The matriarch answered, a low, resonant rumble rolling from her chest. And then, impossibly, the calf closed the distance and gently pressed his head to her leg. Muntu didn't stop him. He didn't interfere. He only watched. One by one, the herd gathered around the calf, touching him softly, scenting him with their trunks, exchanging muted rumbles. The welcome was slow, tentative but real. Elijah had seen calves turned away before, pushed out, ignored. But this time, something had shifted. They didn't just accept the baby. They looked at Muntu, and they didn't turn away. Muntu stood still, unmoving as they surrounded the calf. The matriarch's trunk rested lightly on the little one's back while the rest of the herd drew closer. It wasn't hostility, it was scrutiny. They weren't just evaluating the orphan. They were evaluating him. And Muntu knew that weight well. He had once been part of a powerful herd, led by a matriarch who tolerated no weakness. Young and proud, he had challenged too soon, too hard. The price had been exile, and exile had turned to legend. Now, as this unfamiliar herd welcomed the calf, Muntu felt something stir inside, a feeling he hadn't let himself touch in years. The ache of possibility, the longing for belonging. But he knew all too well, acceptance came at a cost. The matriarch turned her gaze to him, cool, unreadable. Muntu lifted his head, his ears flared slightly, and then silence fell. Not empty silence, but the kind that holds meaning, memory, judgment, forgiveness. She moved, slowly, without dominance, but with presence. Her trunk brushed the ground as she approached until she stood face to face with the old bull. Smaller tusks, lighter frame, but there was strength in her stillness. Muntu didn't bow, but he didn't challenge either. Instead, he let out a low, resonant rumble. Not a warning, not a call, but something older. "A sound elephant's reserved for mourning and for new beginnings," the matriarch answered. Her own rumble was steady and sure. Then she reached forward, her trunk grazing the scar along Muntu's cheek. A gesture of recognition, of acceptance. The others followed, slowly drawing in, not with ceremony, but with quiet understanding. One older female nudged the calf back toward him. The baby ran beneath Muntu's body, trunk wrapping tight around the bull's leg. And this time, the herd didn't stop him. They let it happen. They welcomed it. And in that moment, Muntu understood. This wasn't just an invitation for the calf. It was for him too. They were making space for both of them. Behind the ridge, Elijah lowered his binoculars, breath caught in his throat. He murmured, "Come on, old man. Don't walk away from this." Muntu didn't move, not at first. He looked down at the calf clinging to him, then up at the herd. They waited, not pressuring, not demanding, just present, offering. Trust was foreign to him. He had lived in silence, in solitude. Survival had become his only instinct. But now, for the first time in years, something else was being offered. A place. Not to lead, not to dominate, just to belong. The calf trumpeted again, short, soft, but firm. Muntu looked down. And then, finally, he stepped forward. Not away, not back into the wilderness, but into the circle. One pace, then another. The matriarch didn't shift. She walked beside him, and the others followed. The calf stayed close to his side. Together they disappeared into the golden brush, not as an outcast and an orphan, but as something entirely new. A family. The dust behind them began to settle, but Elijah stayed on the ridge, watching until the last shape faded. Then his radio crackled. A new voice came through, tense. "Northern Patrol here. We've got movement. Lions. Too close to the basin." The herds were tense, agitated, on edge. Hunger had made them wary, and peace felt suddenly fragile. The morning air was thick, heavy with unspoken warning. Before the first light broke over the hills, the elephants had already begun shifting uneasily. Trunks skimmed the dirt, searching for scents that didn't belong. Eyes darted toward the tree lines. Ears remained stiff and alert. Calves stayed closer than usual, their small bodies circling their mothers tightly. The matriarch stopped often, listening. And Muntu stood near the orphaned calf, his towering form weathered from weeks of constant travel, but solid, changed. No longer a wanderer, now a sentinel. Elijah's voice crackled once more through the ranger channel. The lions were closing in from the north, but 3 males had splintered off and were now heading south, toward the herd. These weren't aimless hunters. They were experienced loners, trailing elephant groups, waiting for weakness. A straggler, a misstep, a calf. The elephants were nearing a narrow passage framed by rocks and low brush, an ambush site, classic terrain for predators. Muntu felt it before anyone else did. The moment the matriarch gave the call to move forward, he stopped. His ears flared, trunk raised. He sniffed the wind, sharp, alert. Then, without hesitation, he turned to the ridge and rumbled deep from within. The herd froze. Confused, the matriarch answered with a soft trumpet, but Muntu didn't reply. He advanced, slowly but with purpose, positioning himself between the brush and the path. His head dropped, shoulders squared. Silence. Then the grass shifted. Another rustle. And then movement. One lion appeared, low to the ground, muscles coiled, gaze fixed on the calf trailing behind. It had waited for this. But it hadn't expected Muntu. The bull charged without pause. The ground thundered beneath him. The lion leapt back too late. Muntu struck, not a direct blow, but enough. The lion rolled into the brush, snarling, and vanished. Then a second lion emerged, trying to flank the herd from the opposite side. Panic rippled through the elephants. Mothers trumpeted and gathered their calves. The matriarch turned to defend, but Muntu reached the lion first, this time hitting full force, his charge angled and loud. The sound of his trumpet rang across the basin. The lion faltered, snarled, then fled. The third predator never showed. It had seen enough. For a moment, the only sound was heavy breathing. The herd stood in place, trembling but whole. The calves clung to their mothers, eyes wide, ears flat. And slowly, when no more rustling came from the brush, they began to move, through the pass, into the open expanse beyond. Muntu stayed behind, still, watching, facing the hills. His breath came hard, his body poised for more. But the moment had passed. What he had defended wasn't just the calf. It was his place among them, among the living, the trusted. And now he had earned it. The matriarch returned. She guided the calf toward him, stopped beside Muntu, reached out with her trunk and gently touched his jaw. No words, no grand gesture, just understanding. When Muntu finally turned to follow, the calf fell into step beside him. Light on his feet, eyes still wide but full of certainty. The danger had passed, for now. But something deeper had shifted. The old bull who once walked the wilds alone had found something greater than survival. He had found a place, and his story moved through Tsavo faster than fear. Around ranger fires, they spoke of Muntu with reverence, not just as a protector of one orphaned calf, but as a symbol of what matters. That strength isn't always in tusks or charges. Sometimes, strength is simply showing up when no one else does. It's choosing to stay, to stand, even when you've been forgotten. And over time, seasons changed, and so did the herd. Muntu stayed. He never challenged the leading bulls. He didn't need to. His role was carved from respect, not power. He was the silent watch, the barrier at the edge of the brush, the one calves instinctively ran to when they wandered too far. And the orphan, he grew, strong, spirited, bold. But he never strayed far from Muntu. Their bond was more than chance. It was passed down soul to soul, not in words, in presence, in heart. And though no one knew where Muntu would go when his final day arrived, one truth was clear. He would not go alone. Because sometimes the greatest legends of the wild are not about who conquers, but who returns, who protects, who forgives. And in the golden hush of the savanna, beneath skies that once watched him walk in silence, Muntu walked no longer as a shadow. He walked with his herd, home.